That's all my life I've been waiting for. I've been praying for the people to say that we don't want to fight no more. There'll be no more wars, and our children will say one day, one day, one day.
Shalom, Maccabees. My name is Eli West, and I'm a junior at the Master's School in Westchester, New York, and I'm also proud to be serving on the New Zionist Congress leadership team. First things first, a little bit about me. I love to bake. You can see my Instagram, at Eli West Baking, on the screen below. And I've been selling cakes and cupcakes out of my kitchen in Washington, D.C. for over 3 years now. In the spirit of my hobby, I thought it would be fun to test out a few chocolate rugelach recipes today and share a story with you all. Now, I'm not saying I have the best rugelach recipe, but I did find one by a Jewish chef named Joe Nathan and another one online by Jamie Geller. I'm sure there's so many good ones out there, so if you do want to DM me and share your rugelach recipe, I would absolutely love that. So as you can see, this was Joe Nathan's recipe, and it was very, very simple. It was like only a few ingredients. It was cream cheese, butter, and flour. There was no sugar in the dough, and so it came together really easily. I did taste it though. I'm not sure if I would eat the dough raw ever again. I mean, like, it didn't taste like anything. So yeah, definitely would not recommend eating the dough, but the cookie certainly came out nice. Anyways, I wanted to find two recipes that kind of contrast each other. So Joe Nathan's recipe is more of a typical American Jewish rugelach. That's the one that my family uses. And then Jamie Geller's recipe was a typical kind of like Israeli style rugelach. I don't know if it's as good as anything that I've ever had in Israel, but it came out nicely as well. So seeing as we're baking many different types of rugelach here, I thought it would be fun to try and give a brief history of the cookie and why we eat it. And so basically what I found was that in the Middle Ages, it was traditional to eat cheesecakes at Hanukkah in commemoration of the cheesecakes or pancakes that Judith gave to General Holofernes. After eating these cakes, the general became very thirsty for wine, which Judith also served him. Soon after, Judith slew him, and the Jews were saved. Today, many people serve sour cream pancakes at Hanukkah in memory of Judith. Others serve rugelach, this particular half-moon cream cheese cookie, which is probably a lot different from the original cheesecake, but I still love it, so it doesn't really matter to me. It's probably the most popular of American Jewish cookies, and this horn-shaped treat was made in Europe with butter, and cream cheese was added when it came to America. So here I'm just kind of dusting off my workspace. I had started Jamie Geller's recipe here. It had egg yolks and yeast. There were a few more steps to the recipe, but I thought that made it more fun to make. I think overall I liked hers better, but I haven't tasted them yet actually, so I was waiting to the end of the video to do a taste test. So let's begin, officially. So whenever I start something new, whether it's a project or an essay or anything really, I always think about my origin story. You know, what's the reason for doing this? I think a lot about what led me to where I am and why that particular instance was so influential. We all have an origin story, and I'm excited to share mine with you today. So my family is one of those culturally Jewish families. You know, our religious observance consists mainly of Shabbat dinner on Friday night, celebrating holidays with our very large and loud family, and going to services on the holidays. Religion was and is something my parents wanted my two older sisters and I to figure out by ourselves in terms of kind of how it plays a role in our lives, and that seemed to work well for us, but everyone's different. We're a close-knit family, and our Jewish heritage is a large part of our identity. However, while my parents may not have raised us the most religiously observant, my sisters and I grew up with a deep sense of pride, always acknowledging our roots and connection to Israel. And ever since I was little, I even knew that Zionism was literally woven into my DNA. Zionism was a no-brainer because, why wouldn't it be? However, it wasn't until early last summer when my Jewish pride, or my Zionism, was put to the test. The Black Lives Matter movement was gaining traction, and people all around me started posting on social media. Suddenly, it seemed like people who I knew nothing about social justice wanted to become activists. At first, I didn't think anything of it. Back then, in my mind, there wasn't really a problem with posting an infographic, even if I had no clue what kind of bias it may have had, or if the source was even legitimate. It felt like I was doing something. It felt like I was helping, and there were no major consequences. So this new activist persona that I and many others took on persisted. Now I want to pause here and just recognize how good it smelled in the kitchen. The chocolate was amazing. This was Jamie Geller's chocolate filling. So good. However, I guess what goes around comes around, and soon my peers weren't just posting about Black Lives Matter or the US policing system or even white supremacy within the vegan community, but about Jews, Israel, and Palestine. All of a sudden, everything I had been taught throughout my whole life had come into question. I knew the things that they were saying weren't true because no discourse, or at least a discourse with substance to it, was being had. No one was talking about facts. They were just slamming my identity and spitting on my culture and my people and my history with dozens of baseless claims. I know I'm not the only one who experienced this. And the worst part of it all, for me at least, was that I couldn't stick up for myself. Back then, I didn't have the tools or the knowledge to do anything, and I felt completely stuck. So I want to take a brief pause and say that this is Jamie Geller's chocolate Rugelach still. It was a yeast dough, so it took about 45 minutes to an hour longer because I had to wait for it to rise. My kitchen was hot yesterday, so it took only about 45 minutes. But anyway, here I am spreading out the chocolate on top. You roll the dough into a rectangle and then slice it and roll it. That wasn't something that I've ever done before. I think my mom always does it a little bit differently, but I thought it was pretty good. I mean, it was definitely a little bit messy, as you'll see in a bit, but overall, it worked pretty well. So this idea of being stuck was so absolutely terrifying, and I knew I had to do something about it. And oddly enough, just 12 days before the program was set to begin, I got the chance to go to Hod HaSharon, Israel, a town right outside of Tel Aviv, where I could study and live for the semester. Now, I didn't really believe people when they told me how life-changing my trip to Israel was going to be. I know it changed my parents' lives when they were 16. I mean, at the time I was 15, but I know it changed their lives when they were my age. And I know my sister certainly had a good time, but it felt like everyone around me was saying, Israel's this amazing experience. Like, you're going to come back a completely different person. It's so amazing. It's going to change your life. And I was just skeptical. I didn't really understand what that meant. And if I'm being completely honest, I was probably more excited to be away from home after several months of the pandemic than to actually go to Israel. Saying this out loud a year later, seriously makes me cringe, but what can you do? Times change. Anyways, this is still Jamie Geller's chocolate Rugelach recipe. And so basically, as you saw, is I rolled it out into a rectangle or a rough rectangle and then spread the chocolate over it. And now I'm cutting it out into 24 rectangles and then triangles. So it made about 48 triangles, probably a little bit less. Anyways, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm cutting directly on the countertop. I know you hate that. So I just thought that maybe for this video, for this one time, you'd be okay with it, but I promise I won't do that again. Okay, so after a month of being in Israel, I still hadn't had any of these life-changing moments. In my family, if Jewish pride was inherently Zionist, and I didn't feel at home or any specific connection to Israel like my friends and family said I would, then in a way it felt like I was failing. It felt like I was letting everyone down. And in fact, I remember calling my mom one night and saying to her, Mom, what do I tell people when I get home? Because if I'm being honest, I'm not that happy here. But soon, the country came out of lockdown and I was able to go to Jerusalem for a week. Now, while I was there were many restrictions because of COVID, so we did what we could, and this included going to one of the towns where the Bar Kokhba revolt took place. But what is the Bar Kokhba revolt? Now, I am certainly no Jewish scholar by any means, so please forgive me if some details were lost in the story. But basically, what I learned was that between the years 132 and 135 CE, the Jews in Judea revolted for the second time against the Roman Empire. So the previous revolt, about 60 years earlier, resulted in the destruction of Jerusalem and its temple. The second rebellion is named after its leader, Shimon Bar Kokhba, I hope I'm saying that right, or Bar Kokhba. Realizing the superiority of the Romans in the battlefields, Bar Kokhba's strategy was leading a guerrilla war. The rebels formed a network of underground caves connected by tunnels, and they stockpiled weapons and food and anything they could. This enabled them to attack the Romans by surprise and hide for long periods of time if needed. The partial historical information available on this rebellion suggests that the Romans had to use 11 legions and auxiliary forces to suppress this rebellion. Nevertheless, After nearly 4 years of confrontations, the Romans brutally suppressed the rebellion, defeating Bar Kokhba himself in Beitar. It wasn't until 1948 where the Jews would gain independence again after 2,000 years by forming the State of Israel. Okay, so just very quickly, as you can see, I'm rolling out Jamie Geller's Rugelach, and let me just say, it got everywhere. I mean, the chocolate was everywhere. It was on my clothes, it was on the counter, on the floor, on the cabinets. So, really fun recipe, but if you do want to make it, I suggest that you give yourself some time to clean up afterwards because, yeah, it was definitely a lot. So anyways, now that we know what the Bar Kokhba revolt is, I'll tell you why this story is so important to me. It was late October, and my class and I had to wake up early to drive to the outskirts of Jerusalem to the Bar Kokhba caves. I remember standing there taking this photo, literally seeing the city of Jerusalem right in the background, and thinking what it must have been like for the Jews to see that. I mean, they were so close and yet so far away, and something about just that one instance meant a lot to me. But anyways, soon enough, my peers and I shimmied our way down and through the dark, narrow tunnels. It felt like
I need my service.
but soon, as you see in the video, my class arrived at an opening. The tunnel expanded into a room just big enough for my Israeli studies class to sit around. My teacher had bought us fresh rugelach that morning, and so we all sat around with our flashlights, taking notes and eating rugelach, learning the story of the Bar Kokhba revolt in the Bar Kokhba caves, which I thought was so cool. I remember learning that when the Jews were living in these caves, they had to be extremely quiet, or else the Romans could hear them, and well, if you're in a cave, it's pretty easy to be ambushed. Soon enough, my teacher told us to turn off our flashlights, and it was dead silent in the room. It was weird. I couldn't tell if my eyes were closed or open because it was just so pitch black. And a few moments later, I heard my teacher start to sing Salam, or Od Yavo Shalom Aleinu. It's a Hebrew and Arabic song that translates to "peace will come upon us yet." As you hear it in the video, my friend joined in, and soon the whole class was singing along in the pitch black. We weren't supposed to have our phones, and we definitely were not supposed to be recording it, but I'm so glad I did because every time I hear it, I get so happy. After that, we sang Hine Matov, a song about unity. We sang as loud as we could, and after a while, I began to cry. I was singing because my ancestors couldn't. They literally couldn't. And for 2,000 years, my family and millions of other Jews alike would have done anything to sit in that cave, chanting songs with their friends, and yet they couldn't. And the fact that I could made me feel like the most privileged Jewish person in the world. I was singing for my people, for the Jews that lived before me, and for the Jews that will come after. I will never forget that day. That moment changed my life. And for the first time, I felt my ancestors with me, singing along, eating rugelach right there. I don't think it's something I'll ever forget. And this is my life-changing moment. I mean, this was my origin story. It's how I got to where I am today. It's why I do the work that I do, why I'm a part of New Zionist Congress. And now every time I eat this cookie, this rugelach, it brings me right back home to that tiny, cold cave in my tiny, gorgeous country 2,000 miles away. So it feels a little bit weird to start talking about cookies again after that, but as you can see, I'm just brushing the rugelach with the sugar syrup before I stick them in the oven. Again, there were a lot of steps to this recipe, but I think it came out really well. I think it's also funny, though, because while they do taste good, it just goes back to the running theory that everything tastes better in Israel. I mean, it's such a cliche, but it's true. There's not that many foods that taste better in the U.S. than in Israel, so again, just another reason why I love that country. So Jamie Geller's recipe definitely took home the gold on this one, but Joe Nathan's Rugelach is always a classic. And I think they came out pretty well. And lastly, you can see me adding glitter to these cookies because, well, I'm gay and I put glitter on everything I bake. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. And remember, in the name of every Jew who has lit a candle in the darkness, we are here to build a bonfire.